Global Counterterrorism will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess of the subcommittee at any point, and all members will have 5 days to submit statements, extraneous material, and questions. For the record, subject to the length limitation of the rules. As a reminder to members, please keep your video function on at all times, even when you're not recognized by the chair. Members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves, and please remember to mute yourself after you finish speaking. Consistent with House Resolution 8 and the accompanying regulation, staff will only mute members and witnesses as appropriate when they are not under recognition to eliminate background noise. I see that we have a quorum. We'll now recognize myself for opening remarks pursuant to notice. We are holding a hearing on grassroots people-to-people peace-building efforts between Israelis and Palestinians. I want to note that today's hearing comes on the heels of House Foreign Affairs Committee Chair Meeks's recent congressional delegation to the region. I was honored to join Chairman Meeks on his visit, the first official congressional delegation since the pandemic, where we met with new Israeli government leaders, USAID implementers, and civil society groups. We also met with Palestinian youth, civil society, and business leaders, and the leadership of the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah. Of course, this visit did not take place in a vacuum. We arrived with the backdrop of a new government in Israel, a diverse coalition, a remarkably diverse coalition from left to right, including the historic participation of the Ram Party, as well as coming right on the heels of May's conflict, the war that Hamas launched against Israel, and the tension in Jerusalem and the recent protests against the Palestinian Authority. And while we felt a certain sense of optimism, I absolutely was optimistic looking forward, it was also clear through our meetings that there is a pressing need to re-engage on all sides, the U.S. and Israel, the U.S. and the Palestinians, and Israelis and Palestinians together. Both Israelis and Palestinians have vibrant civil societies. Organizations across the political spectrum work to engage the public and to create proactive movement on critical issues facing both peoples, from water and climate to transportation and justice. Underpinning these programs has been long-standing U.S. support for grassroots organizations that bring together Israelis and Palestinians to work on the very issues that affect both populations to help build bridges and establish common ground. Since 2008, the United States has provided over $100 million for conflict management and mitigation, CMM programs. Many of us have had the pleasure of meeting with some of the recipients of this funding over the years. Kids learning coexistence in Kids for Peace, youth coming together through music in the Jerusalem Youth Choir, parents grieving children lost to the conflict at Parents Circle, teachers sharing professional development, environmentalists working together on water and agriculture. It's a very long list. These programs form the foundation of coexistence. They allow children who have spent their lives separated from what they may only know as the other to get to know kids with the same interests and the same hopes that they have. They foster a new generation of leaders that break down barriers to peace. The United States is on the verge of a substantial new investment in people-to-people programs through the Nita M. Lowy Middle East Partnership for Peace Act, MEPA. This bipartisan legislation, which was signed into law last December, creates a two-track approach to helping to build the foundation for peaceful coexistence between Israelis and Palestinians, and for a sustainable two-state solution and an initiative to promote Israeli-Palestinian economic cooperation. The Lowy Fund will distribute $50 million per year for 5 years to the People-to-People Partnership Fund for Peace, run by USAID, and the Joint Investment for Peace Fund, run by the Development Finance Corporation. For the past decade, CMM programs had received roughly $10 million per year. The Lowy Fund will provide a significant scaling up of programming and, as the Biden administration has already done, restore programming funds to ventures between Israeli Jews and Israeli Arabs and between Israelis and Palestinians. In 2018, the previous administration made a decision to restrict funds. We have an opportunity with the Lowy Fund and the Partnership for Peace Act to, as I said, reestablish bridges and seek common ground. The funds already pledged by the Biden administration, as well as the funding expected to come online from the Lowy Fund in December 2021, represents an opportunity for the United States to really double down on our effort to build peace, even in the absence of any sort of peace process. In fact, in the absence of political talks, it is all the more important to support these grassroots efforts. Too often, Israelis and Palestinians are only thought of in terms of the conflict, but behind the conflict are so many people who aspire to live their lives in peace and security and dignity and rights that should be guaranteed to all of us. We have to change perceptions if we ever want to bring about lasting peace. And I would say to my colleagues, I make no apology for supporting Israel's right to live in security and to defend herself. I also challenge all of us to put an end to the idea that being pro-Israel somehow means that you don't care about Palestinians, or supporting the rights of Palestinians to have their own state means that you don't care about Israelis' right to live in security. At the same time, I would say for those who make the argument wrongly that somehow to support the Palestinians means also to oppose the existence of the state of Israel, this doesn't advance peace, it does a disservice to those that we're going to hear from today who are working so hard to help lay the foundation for meaningful and long-lasting peace. We have a responsibility in our own right to break down barriers and stereotypes, just as those who bravely participate in these programs are doing. We are honored today to be joined by an esteemed panel of experts, Ms. Rothbart and Ms. Majdalani. I want to specifically say to both of you that the work you and your organizations have done to keep peace and hope alive is making a real difference. I've seen it firsthand when I've met with students and activists who participate in these programs. They represent the future that we need to invest in. I look forward to today's discussion, and I now yield to the ranking member for his opening remarks. Ranking Member Wilson.
Thank you, Chairman Ted Deutsch, for calling this important hearing. In the aftermath of the recent surprise rocket attacks, over 4,000 rockets being launched by Iranian-backed Hamas against Israeli families, it's more critical than ever that external malign influence be curbed and regional efforts to de-escalate tensions between neighbors be encouraged. The historic Abraham Accords represents a meaningful framework for economic and regional security cooperation between Arab countries and Israel, and there is much optimism for what means to be achieved near and long term. Normalization with Israel stands to unleash the talent potential of the region and finally transform chaos and instability into prosperity for families of the Middle East and here at home in America. One of the most positive instruments for change is people themselves. In addition to the People to People Partnership for Peace Fund, the Middle East Partnership for Peace Act provides for the creation of a joint investment for peace initiative, which represents a positive step forward by investing in grassroots efforts to forge new relationships through enterprise and innovation. I'm grateful to former Chairwoman Nita Lowey for her career in public service and her work in this important initiative. This will not be the first initiative of its kind. There are clear successes seen in the Middle East Investment Initiative with its promotion of positive economic growth and job creation, both of which are major indicators for stability and to reduce violence. Additionally, the Middle East Regional Cooperation has successfully brought together scientists from Egypt and Israel and has expanded to researchers in Jordan, Lebanon, Morocco, Tunisia, the West Bank, and Gaza with capability to expand further. It's important that any development investment be subject to the same safeguards and vetting as other aid, and to be fully enforceable and credible protections in place to ensure compliance with the Taylor-Force Act and other oversight mechanisms to ensure that the funds are not diverted to provide death benefits for mass murderers who have committed terrorist acts against people of Israel and the United States. The Middle East is more integrated and at peace with itself and when Arabs and Israelis are invested in each other's futures and economies, and some of the most critical threats to America and Israeli families will be put to rest. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses and thank them for their expertise. And I yield back and thank you, Chairman Deutsch.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Wilson. I will now introduce our distinguished witnesses. Ms. Lucy Kurtzer-Ellenbogen is the director of the Israeli-Palestinian Conflict Program at the U.S. Institute of Peace. She previously worked with U.S. Department of State as an Arabic language specialist and as the program officer for the Kennedy School of Government's Middle East Initiative at Harvard University, where she managed work on the Israeli, Palestinian, and Saudi Arabian portfolios. Ms. Nada Majdalani is the Palestinian director of EcoPeace Middle East. She had been part of several affiliation of Palestinian Israeli youth groups as a moderator and activist, including the One Voice movement and the Palestinian Israeli Young Entrepreneurs Forum. Ms. Majdalani has presented before various international platforms, including the UN Security Council, NATO, and the Planetary Security Conference. She has also served in leading technical positions with several international agencies. And Ms. Meredith Mishkin Rothbart is the founder and CEO of Amal Tikva, a collaborative initiative that brings together philanthropists, field experts, organizations, and activists to support civil society peace building between Israelis and Palestinians. In this role, she has led strategic planning processes for over a dozen NGOs and is currently co-authoring a strategic planning guidebook for peace building initiatives. Previously, Ms. Rothbart was the director of Kids for Peace Jerusalem from 2017 to 2019. She serves on several advisory boards and was founding curator for the Jerusalem Global Shapers Hub of the World Economic Forum. And finally, Mr. Daniel Runde is the Senior Vice President, Director of the Project on Prosperity and Development, and holds the William A. Schreier Chair in Global Analysis at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Previously, Mr. Runde held senior leadership roles at the International Finance Corporation from 2005 to 2007. He was director of the Office of Global Development Alliances at U.S. Agency for International Development, and he led the GDA Partnership Initiative. He serves on several advisory committees and boards. He's a lifetime member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and holds the Officer's Cross in the Order of Isabel La Católica, a Spanish civil order. This is a really esteemed panel. Thank you all for being here today. I will recognize the witnesses for 5 minutes each, and without objection, your prepared written statements will be made a part of the record. Ms. Kurtzer-Ellenbogen, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Deutsch, Ranking Member Wilson, and committee members. Thank you all for this opportunity to testify on grassroots peacebuilding efforts between Israelis and Palestinians. The timing of this hearing is critically important, coming, as we've heard, on the heels of the latest conflict between Israel and Hamas that was preceded by ongoing tensions and clashes in Jerusalem and violence between Jewish and Arab citizens of Israel. These events underscore the significance of the bipartisan Mita Emloni Middle East Partnership for Peace Act. I direct the Israeli-Palestinian Conflict Program at the congressionally established and nonpartisan U.S. Institute of Peace. However, the views expressed here today are my own. After decades of entrenched conflict, Israeli and Palestinian societies mirror each other in concerning ways. They don't believe a near-term political solution is possible. They're convinced the other side is not a good faith partner for peace. And most concerning in both societies, the youngest generations hold the hardest line attitudes towards the other. This is why investment in people-to-people work is vital and it is urgent. Grassroots peacebuilding is not a substitute for a political process, but it also can't be dismissed as an afterthought or treated as just a supportive tool of an active diplomatic process. Israelis and Palestinians don't have the luxury of waiting for political efforts to succeed. They are living with the violence, fear, hatred, and structural barriers to peace every day. Peacebuilding is an ongoing set of intentional practices aimed at reducing drivers of conflict, preventing violence, and building skills, trust, and relationships that can transform the conflict and improve lives and livelihoods. In doing so, it can open up space for constructive diplomatic processes and build the conditions required to sustain eventual agreements. The good news, and there is good news, is that the tools for forging impact exist. Evaluations demonstrate that people-to-people activities effectively counter dehumanization and distrust, create openness to hearing the perspective of the other side, and can yield concrete socio-economic changes. The field is often underestimated. It is dynamic, it's responsive to learning in the evolving conflict context, and it employs a range of strategies, whether dialogue, interfaith engagement, joint civic action, cooperation on issues such as health, technology, the environment, and business. People-to-people programs have often been accused of preaching to the converted. This is not true. Participants join these programs out of a range of motivations, and in the past decade, participation from more religiously and politically conservative communities previously considered outside of the so-called traditional peace camp has grown. Many misperceive that the field has benefited from vast amounts of funding. We've heard a little bit from Congressman Deutsch about the funding that's been invested. The US government and international community have invested in this work. But relative to the scope of the challenge, this funding has fallen far short till now of what is needed to enact widespread change. By striking contrast and comparison, we can look at the Northern Ireland conflict context. The US and other governments created and funded the International Fund for Ireland to support economic development and peace, beginning 12 years before the Good Friday Peace Agreement. Over 3 decades, as a proportion of that conflict arena's population, the international community spent the equivalent of $44 per capita annually on peacebuilding priorities in Northern Ireland. By contrast, today in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the international community spends $1.50 per capita. This is why $250 million over 5 years presents a game-changing opportunity, particularly in a context in which there is a wait list for many existing people-to-people programs. The Partnership Fund for Peace Act also provides a new and flexible policy tool to the administration in its pursuit of preventing conflict deterioration and paving the way for a sustainable solution. With the rest of my time, I'll offer just a few thoughts on how initial funds may be most usefully directed to maximize impact of investment. Initial funding would do well to support foundational investments that enhance the existing field's capacity to maximize the impact of future funding. This would include investments in things like physical space. Many underestimate the challenge inherent in finding physical spaces that can be both comfortably and safely and efficiently met in by Israelis and Palestinians together. So a dedicated hub space where the community can co-create, share resources, co-innovate would really maximize the collective footprint of the field. Likewise, investment in shared expertise as a shared resource in things like monitoring and evaluation, project design, facilitation training, and communications that help socialize the idea of Israeli and Palestinian society of the peace-building field, what it represents, and the impacts it can achieve. I respectfully propose that Congress also build on this message it has sent through passage of the Act to further give support and legitimacy to the field. This can be done by prioritizing civil society meetings, as Chairman Deutsch mentioned happened on their recent trip, prioritizing meetings with those people when they're in the region. This will help empower peace builders whose work and voices are too often drowned out or overshadowed by the violent spoilers that capture the headlines. The US interests exist, the urgency exists, the capacity to start implementing exists, the demand exists, and now with the Partnership for Peace Fund, so does the opportunity. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kurtzer-Ellenbogen. Ms. Majdalani, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Deutsch, Ranking Member Wilson, and members of House Foreign Affairs, thank you for giving us this opportunity, and particularly at a very critical time, as my colleague Lucy has mentioned, especially that we are seeing now that civil society organizations and the peace-building community is resuming activities in the region following the funding cuts by USAID for several years. To be honest, our community is looking forward the results and eagerly on the results of this hearing and this event, particularly that we've been left alone for several years, and at the moment we look at the opportunities that are coming up in the future. Particularly after several decades of disappointment on the political track, and how this our leaderships on both sides, Palestinian and Israelis, have failed us as a peace-building community. 3 decades following the Madrid conference and later the Oslo Accords and we've been promised peace and prosperity and coexistence. However, the peace process remains stalled, and whatever diplomatic and political work on the higher level has been done without the investment in community and engagement of the public and civil society, all this effort cannot be basically advanced without the support of civil society and communities. And civil society remains the key player to mobilize Palestinians and Israelis, even in the most difficult times. We have survived as a community several difficulties and several pushbacks, especially by the deteriorating geopolitical situation. We are still a dynamic community that raises the bar, that stands against dehumanization of the other. We amplify values of humanity, mutual respect, and we maintain sanity of this basically crazy region. We, as a community, have come up with several mechanisms and tools to engage and to recruit peace activists and agents of change on the ground. And some of these tools was over the years that is utilized is actually climate change, and the utilization of climate change as an opportunity multiplier rather than a threat multiplier that is being described in several literature reviews. And this is particularly the interest of both communities, Palestinians and Israelis, when it comes to climate security in terms of water and energy security and environmental defeating environmental degradation. Particularly, this corresponds also to the national security interests of and international foreign policy interests of the US and Europe, and particularly that climate change has been recognized as a threat multiplier, and as a result of poverty and unemployment, it has proven that ISIS and violent groups have been recruited as an indirect result of climate change impacts. So as we speak, there are several opportunities here to continue working with civil society organizations on initiatives that are related to people-to-people engagement on several levels in education, in on-ground activism, on climate change and environmental cooperation and cross-border cooperation. And the opportunity rises from facts and figures following a poll that was conducted by EcoPeace Middle East, showing that 73% of Palestinians recognize regional cooperation on water and environmental issues, in comparison to almost also 40% of Israelis who are also believing in regional cooperation on environmental issues. We believe in the strong presence of civil society as an engaging power with the people, and we see that initiatives such as the Green Blue Deal for the Middle East is the way forward, starting from education, engaging with academics, with youth, with community leaders, with entrepreneurs. And it's important to create a safe space and infrastructure for those people to meet and find geopolitical solutions, but also create joint projects and prototypes for solutions that address environmental risks. And we very much rely on the interest of Biden's administration on continuing negotiating the two-state solution, but also to build back better and their interest in climate change and going back to the climate and Paris Agreement and Accords. So in that sense, the United States should not miss this moment and this opportunity for already existing projects and robust ideas for transformative diplomacy with the Palestinian and Israeli governments and also people, and to find detailed programs and with timelines and financing towards the implementation of people-to-people programs and environmental peace building in the broader context of the two-state solution. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and I leave the rest to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Majdalani. Really grateful for your participation and your comments. We'll look forward to continuing the conversation with you. Ms. Rothbart, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Deutsch, Ranking Member Wilson, and members of the committee for the opportunity to testify on the power of people-to-people peace building. I'm Meredith Rothbart. I'm a Jewish Israeli religious Zionist, and I'm the founder of Amal Tikva, which brings together NGO leaders, philanthropists, and field experts to support peace building between Israelis and Palestinians. I'm here today to share with you my view from the ground. We've seen over the last few months the role that grassroots movements can and do play in our region, for better or for worse. I'm talking Sheikh Jarrah, the Temple Mount, mixed cities, and Gaza. And yet, for the last nearly 30 years since the failure of the Oslo Accords, peace efforts between Israelis and Palestinians have continued to disregard issues like identity and nationhood, grief, and the ideologies that are at the root of the conflict. We've learned a lot since Oslo. We've learned that peace building is not a hashtag, that dialogue groups will not end the conflict. But we've learned that civil society peace building could actually break down this intractable nature of our conflict into manageable parts, and that we can tackle them one by one, leading to a belief that peace is possible. We've learned that all people need to play an integral role in pursuing peace. We've learned that concrete actions need to improve lives today, and that that's what real peace building is. MEPA is monumental. It actually invites for the first time the possibility of creating a peace building field that operates at the scale of the conflict. From where I'm standing, we have two main objectives. The first is to engage a critical mass of Israelis and Palestinians in people-to-people peace building. It has never been done before. And the second is to develop and host peace-building infrastructure, something that's never existed. We've been operating fragmented. Years of evaluation and program research have proven that person-to-person models of peace-building is effective in changing attitudes. It's effective in enhancing cooperation. We've seen it here and in other conflicts in the world. And on the ground, we're using these models, but it hasn't been enough because the field isn't at scale. This is where MEPA comes in, and MEPA's success is vital. The funding that you have passed allows the field an opportunity to be strategic, to examine best practices, to work with the models that we've found at the International Fund in Northern Ireland that have worked, and to not use the ones that haven't worked. And this is what my colleagues and I have been working on, among others. It's almost 6 o'clock here. I'm in Jerusalem, and just today I've been working with Israelis and Palestinians all day trying to build the capacity to receive MEPA funds. I sat with Lisan, a language program which is run by Israeli college students who volunteer their time to make Hebrew resources in Israel more accessible to their Palestinian peers in Jerusalem. Things like public transportation, healthcare, employment opportunities. Yesterday I sat with Tammy and Wafa, who work in community centers right next to each other, one Israeli and one Palestinian, and they're working together to promote activism in their communities to make their neighborhoods safer and more convenient. There's tons more organizations like this who have done a lot of work, especially thanks to US government funding. But now, because of MEPA, there's a game changer. They can actually utilize infrastructure at a much larger scale and reach much more people. Just like Lucy mentioned, MEPA can and should support capital projects like a Center for Israeli-Palestinian Peace, a museum of the other where each side can experience the other's reality, a Peace Leadership Institute. Some of this may sound obvious, and you may be wondering if it's ever happened before, and I can tell you that it hasn't. No one's ever tried these. MEPA can and should create a laboratory for program innovation rooted in data research on best practices, offering seed funding to promote new initiatives with mentorship of USAID support staff. MEPA can and should offer impact investments, which could generate impact alongside financial return, invest in startups, invest in business ventures, in income generating programs for nonprofits that would leverage the US government's investment. Passing MEPA into law has demonstrated that the US government understands that peace between Israelis and Palestinians needs to be built strategically by the people themselves who are at war with one another and are living right next to each other. And this is our chance to do it. So thank you for focusing on this issue and for providing a once-in-a-conflict opportunity to change the dynamic on the ground between Israelis and Palestinians. This is the opportunity to lay a foundation for a just and lasting peace.
Thank you, Ms. Rothbart, for your really important testimony. Very much appreciated. And Mr. Runde, we will go to you. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Deutsch, Ranking Member Wilson, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. My testimony focuses on providing recommendations for the Joint Investment for Peace initiative created as part of the Lowy Middle East Partnership for Peace Act. It was an important action by the Congress, and it is a fitting living memorial to former Congresswoman Nita Lowey. Before I begin, I acknowledge that there are many challenges and geopolitical issues that transcend the scope of this hearing. It should be noted that when we carry out the activities of MEPA, including the Joint Investment Initiative, any investments will have to undergo significant due diligence and must be in full compliance with the Taylor Force Act. My key message to you today is this: the funds should be used for long-term efforts to engage Israelis and Palestinians together, along with tying them closer to key partners, including Egypt and Jordan. For the MEPA investment funds to work, the U.S. government will need to use some grant money to improve the business climate and the capacity of businesses to be able to seek MEPA monies and use them wisely. MEPA activities will operate in a conflict-affected and fragile environment, which creates a number of challenges. These challenges underscore the importance of creating a friendly business environment, providing businesses with technical assistance, including skills development, along with support for government regulators and local banks to create a strong financial ecosystem. The business environment in this region is challenging. The West Bank and Gaza are relatively small economies and a relatively small population. Of that population, 54% is under the age of 25 with high unemployment. At the same time, approximately 50% of businesses operate formally, which means paying taxes, obeying labor and environmental laws, and being able to access normal forms of finance. The other 50% of businesses are informal. They do not pay taxes, do not necessarily follow labor and environmental laws, nor do they have access to normal forms of finance to grow. Companies in the formal sector are the ones that the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation will likely encourage to apply to the Joint Investment Initiative. Informal businesses that the DFC will not be able to engage can, however, benefit from technical assistance that USAID can provide through entrepreneurship development and training programs. The deployment of innovative financial instruments to spur private sector growth can support positive change in the West Bank and Gaza. I have several specific actionable steps that will be required to make the Joint Investment Initiative a success. First, Congress should work closely with USAID to ensure that some of the USAID program budget is used to improve the business environment in the West Bank and Gaza so as to grow the universe of companies that the DFC can invest in. Second, there are many businesses and entrepreneurs that are not in a place today to put together what are called bankable projects in the West Bank and Gaza. There is a large cadre of highly educated and trained individuals and many creative entrepreneurs in the West Bank and Gaza. USAID should use some program monies to support sector-wide technical assistance to businesses that might not meet the current DFC standards for them to get financing. Third, given the importance of regional partners and actors, MEPA programs should engage and strengthen inter-regional economic cooperation with Jordan and Egypt, crucial economic partners for the Palestinian territories and Israel. Positive economic cooperation between Palestinians and Israelis through the MEPA programs will benefit the entire region. Fourth, there are opportunities for MEPA's joint investment initiative portfolio to make what are called direct equity investments into companies in the region. To make full use of this specific provision, Congress should consider a fix to allow for MEPA funds to be exempt from the so-called provision 1434 Article J, I don't know who comes up with these, of the 2018 Build Act, which was set up to prevent the DFC from financing too large a portion of its budget from the State Department and USAID. I will note that the proposed FY 2022 House Appropriations State Foreign Operations Bill provides this exact fix. Fifth, in addition to equity investments, the DFC should consider using what are called first loss guarantees in its joint investment initiative portfolio. Monies for such first loss guarantees could also come to the DFC via USAID grant money. First loss guarantees are a mechanism where a third party, in this case the DFC, compensates lenders in the case of a borrower default, and particularly important in fragile settings, given the perceived higher risk associated with these geographies. Apart from these 5 recommendations, I want to encourage USAID and the DFC to take a very hard look at creating meaningful metrics for success. I want to suggest including things such as how many joint businesses between Israelis and Palestinians have been formed or were formed or are formed, and how many Israelis are employed alongside how many Palestinians. So meaningful metrics. I appreciate the opportunity to testify before you today. Thank you for the opportunity.
Mr. Runde, thank you very much. I just want to make one. Your testimony was excellent, but I just want to be clear. This is a wonderful program named for our former colleague, but it is not a memorial program. I know she's watching, and it's
a living memorial. A living. I meant a living memorial.
All right. I thought that's what you meant. I just wanted to be clear. Thanks to all of the witnesses for really extraordinary testimony. Thanks for setting us on a great path to a really important conversation. I'll now recognize members for 5 minutes each. Pursuant to House rules, all time yielded is for the purposes of questioning our witnesses. And because of the virtual format of the hearing, I'll recognize members by committee seniority, alternating between Democrats and Republicans. If you miss your turn, let the staff know, and we will come back to you. And if you seek recognition, you must unmute your microphone and address the chair verbally. I will defer to the end of the questioning, and with that, we'll start by yielding to my friend from Virginia, Mr. Connolly, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so much for holding this hearing. What a thoughtful hearing, and something I think desperately needed in our dialogue and discussions about the Middle East. And it's a contribution. So thank you so much for doing this. Mr. Runde, the MEPA and allied sort of efforts have been compared to what occurred with Northern Ireland. And I was actually in the Congress at a staff level when we created the Fund for Ireland and funded it. But the precedent to that effort back in 1988 and 89 was an accord between the parties, the Anglo-Irish Accord. Margaret Thatcher signed off on it, and it involved the government of the Republic of Ireland and Great Britain, and the United States agreed to fund the project part so that we would be doing things similar to what we're discussing here in terms of bringing people together and trying to have people-to-people, investments, diplomacy, and the like. But it required, to be successful or to go forward, it really required an accord between the governments involved before we could do that. Do you believe, absent such an accord here, that that's going to be an impediment to the success of what we're discussing?
Thank you, Congressman. I think that this is going to be a very challenging environment to support investable projects to begin with. It's a fragile context. There's a low amount of trust. There's a high level of informality in the economy. Overlay on that significant geopolitical tensions that have flared in the last 90 to 120 days. I think it's going to be challenging. I would also suggest is in my recommendations that we spend time. I think it's great that there are going to be significant investments with these MEPA monies looking at peace building efforts. I'm recommending alongside those peace building efforts to build additional trust and to create more connectivity, that we get that there's not currently enough I think there's not enough investable deals. It'll be hard to get a lot of investable deals when you have a 50% of the economy is informal and it's a relatively small economy. So what I'm suggesting is, in addition to build trust, create a bigger pie of opportunities for the DFC to invest in. Yes, I think it would be really wonderful if there was some kind of course, there would be a big opportunity if we had peace, a formal peace between the two parties. I agree with you, Congressman.
Thank you. Yeah, and I would say we probably need something very high profile to put a point on the scoreboard real quick. Ms. Kurtzer-Ellenbogen, again, to be devil's advocate, how do we really succeed in doing what we want to do, given the fact that, the trust on both sides is so fundamentally broken? I mean, polling shows 90% of one community doesn't trust the other, and 79% of that community doesn't trust the other. In terms of resources, you look at Northern Ireland, and we're still trying to recover 40 years later. But I mean, we've invested about $44 per capita. In this effort, we've invested about $1.50. So don't we start from kind of a really disadvantaged position? And what gives you hope that over time, nonetheless, we can succeed?
Thank you, Congressman Connolly. As you've noted, and as I mentioned in my remarks, the disparity in funding until now that has gone into the Israeli-Palestinian conflict versus the funding and support that went into the Northern Ireland conflict context is vast. And actually what we've learned, I think, from the Northern Ireland context is the agreement that you mentioned, the Anglo-Irish agreement, was really very interim. And in fact, it was from there, about 12 years of funding that got you to the Good Friday Agreement, and the work has continued since then. So investment in this kind of work helps prepare the ground for constructive diplomatic agreements and prepares the ground for agreements to take hold and take root, to be sustained by people-to-people activities. I have hope because I've seen the impact that these programs that have existed and funded can have on the ground and on individual attitudes, personal transformation. Evaluation studies, starting with baseline attitude studies and looking after programs, show that there is consistently personal transformation takes place. What this money from MEPA enables us to do is scale that personal transformation up to great societal transformation. That's what makes it even a possibility, seeing Nada and Meredith for what they and their colleagues do. And the impact it provides. I think I'm over time right now on this question, but I can give some concrete examples going forward.
Yeah. Well, my time is up, but I think the parallels of both apt, but in some cases not so much. And I will just say that the fact that Margaret Thatcher, of all people, signed the Anglo-Irish Accord had deep penetration into the unionist community in Northern Ireland and persuaded the Republic of Ireland that maybe this was worth engaging in. Because she was such an unlikely figure to sign it, it was like Nixon going to China. And I don't know that we have that here in this case, but hopefully we can. At any rate, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My time is up.
Thank you, Mr. Connolly. Ranking Member Wilson, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman Ted Deutsch. And again, I'm grateful that President Jerry Connolly and I agreed that Margaret Thatcher is an extraordinary individual. With that, also, I have seen successful initiatives in Jerusalem personally. I visited the Order of St. John medical facilities, which have been operating since 1882 in Jerusalem, providing healthcare to persons in need. Additionally, visiting Hadassah Hospital to see the extraordinary facilities there that are provided to all citizens. And I'm particularly grateful that my home state of South Carolina, that we have very generous individuals in my state who have been very involved with the Order of St. John and also the hospital. With that in mind, thank all the witnesses today. And Mr. Runde, I want to ask you, what sectors have been historically most successful as venues for Israeli-Palestinian economic cooperation?
I want to suggest, thank you, Congressman. It's nice to see you again.
Hear, hear.
I want to suggest a couple of sectors of opportunity. I think the tourism opportunity is an opportunity. This is an underfunded sector. There's enormous potential for the tourism sector. Agricultural, of course, water, agribusiness, I think are all areas that should be looked at, as well as I also would like to suggest the ICT sector. As I mentioned, this is an enormous community of highly capable, enormous human talent in the West Bank and Gaza, and so I think there's some really great opportunities. And I think there are also some really great opportunities for, across borders, if you will.
And hey, I appreciate very much you pointing out about tourism. I, in my law practice, represented the hospitality industry, and to see the opportunities for particularly entry-level jobs, and who cares who they are. The good thing is that it can be open to everyone. And with millions of tourists who would be eager to go to a stable Jerusalem and surrounding cities, how positive it would be. Additionally, I had the extraordinary opportunity last January to accompany Congresswoman Lowe to Jerusalem. I saw firsthand her affection for the people of the region. We miss her very much in Washington. And I'm confident with she and her husband, there's life after office. And so with that in mind, what sectors, Mr. Runde, do you see to grow Palestinian-Israeli basis cooperation through the Lowe?
As I said in my remarks, I think it's just a very fitting memorial to Congresswoman Nita Lowe. I miss her too. I'm a Republican and I miss her a lot, and we still need her voice. I would just say that I go back to the ICT sector, agribusiness, water, and tourism are the easy ones. I would say, Congressman, that the best social program in the world is a job. And so I agree with you. And I think there's a lot of important entry-level role jobs, both in the ICT sector and in the travel, tourism, and hospitality sectors. And so we can get, so I'm hopeful about those, sir.
And I don't know how much time I have. Okay, anyway. Okay.
Minute and a half, Mr. Wilson.
Hey, I even have time, I think. And that is for our witness, Ms. Michigan Rothbart. What opportunities are there for joint opportunities with Jordan and Egypt with cross-border cooperation?
Thank you, Representative Wilson. I think actually Nada could probably speak a bit more to cross-border cooperation with Egypt and Jordan, as I know that EcoPeace has been working a lot with that. So I'm going to give my time to Naja.
Here, here. Thank you.
Thank you, Meredith. We've certainly worked a lot with Jordan over the past 26 years. There's a lot of initiatives, not only on the people-to-people level, but I want to shed the light on the opportunities that exist on even economic development and engagement of youth entrepreneurs and the business community through organizations that run people-to-people programs as well. We could work on issues that are relevant to water and energy exchange from renewable sources, and from addressing also sustainable development goals. And it's basically ideas that create interdependencies between the people, but also the governments, which could address basically also geopolitical interests and also financial and economic interests, along with environmental stability interests. Such exchanges of water and energy between the three countries is addressed through EcoPeace by our work on a pre-feasibility study that is the water energy nexus. There could be also a lot of cooperation in terms of know-how and knowledge exchange on the agricultural sector and agricultural innovation, including technology and solutions development to optimize agricultural production and best utilization of resources in a place that is suffering from shortage of water. And we have seen this as a very successful example, particularly in our programming between Palestinians, Jordanians, and Israelis, and in areas that are very sensitive and recognized as environmental hotspots like the Jordan Valley. So we do have this experience not only as an organization, but we do see other opportunities through several CMM partners who have worked extensively with CMM programs and USAID over the past years, engaging other countries from the region. We also see an opportunity for a greater Green-Blue deal that not only engages Jordanians, Palestinians, Israelis, and Egyptians, but also extends further to engaging with the Gulf countries and taking opportunity of the recent Abraham Accords and how we can extend foreign investments in the region in sectors that are relevant to climate change resilience and adaptation, but also in sectors such as ICT and development of prototypes and solutions. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. And now you back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Mr. Keating, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, I wanted to follow up on that exact theme. That was the nature of my question. One that, given the climate change issues in the Middle East, that we mentioned the water shortages, but also the heat waves, the droughts, and the effects of that are clear. But can you go a little further in your discussion that you just responded to, in terms of not just that that's an area of investment, but can it be used, and how successfully can it be used to bring people together on these issues? Is it an area where we can use this for trust building? Anyone that, if you want to take that, I think, or if you want to follow up, go right ahead. On how the environmental and climate change issues can be used, not only to deal with the need of working together, but also in terms of trust building.
Congressman Keating, I can start to give an answer on that. I think Nada will have more to say from her specific examples with her work, but what we have seen on all these, what I would call areas of technical mutual benefit and interest cooperation, is that it enables participants to focus on tangible issues that bring real benefit to their communities, and have sometimes as even a byproduct the trust building that comes with working towards a common goal. So I know, again, Nada might want to talk more about their Good Water Neighbors project that I know EcoPeace has done, and other such examples of work, including ones that draw very much on faith communities. When you're looking at water as a resource in the Middle East, and you look at the Jordan River Valley, in which I know EcoPeace has done a lot of work, the Jordan River is such an important site to Christians, Muslims, and Jews alike. And what EcoPeace has done, which has been fascinating to watch as an analyst of this field, is take faith communities and leverage this to preserve the water and clean the water source that is the Jordan River. Interest faith communities and why that's important. Promote ecotourism. This is where you get the intersection of peace building and business and where they work hand in hand. I'll yield to Nadia if she wants to speak more about these programs that she's more intimately familiar with. But I hope that helps to answer your question.
Thank you, Lucy. Excuse me, I couldn't hear much of the question, but now I recognize that much of what Lucy has mentioned indeed is reflective of our ability as a community to work with people, but also with stakeholders on trust-building measures. First of all, when we speak about trust-building measures at the level of communities, we engage with community leaders, with municipalities and local governmental units, with students and women and farmers, and we try to amplify and address the realities on ground in terms of economic realities, environmental realities, water shortages, service shortages, and people start learning about each other's lives and respecting each other as human beings, and understanding the realities that they are interconnected, and whatever happens on one side does reflect on the very stability and security of the other side. And here's where we utilize and amplify the voices of the communities to go a step further and upper with working with our constituents and with also our decision makers, particularly when we speak about concepts like the water energy nexus, like rehabilitating the Jordan River Valley as a joint resource. When we speak about issues that are relevant to climate security, we also create an opportunity to address win-win situations rather than basically lose-lose situations. One of the major issues that we address also is the reallocation of water resources between Palestinians and Israelis, which has been held hostage for several years under the current political paradigm. We call for water issues to be a low-hanging fruit for basically bringing people together into practical solutions to build trust between the two parties at even a higher political level.
Well, thank you. I just wanted to, my time is up. I just wanted to say, I really respect the answer in terms of the practical sense of the water. I thought it was fascinating bringing in the faith-based perspective as part of this, and the fact that whether you're Palestinian or Israeli, this is an issue for their children and future generations. So it's an opportunity to go together. So great answer from both of you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Mr. Keating. Mr. Mast, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to start with Ms. Rothbart. I appreciate the comments of all of our panelists, but you've spoken a little bit about the grassroots efforts, and I'd just like to know, in your opinion, how is Hamas viewing, supporting, getting in the way of these grassroots efforts that are going on to promote peace among the populations, whichever direction that takes you, and I could guess, but.
Thank you for the question, and I think it's important to raise it. I'm going to be honest, I haven't seen Hamas infiltrate peace-building efforts and the people that are trying to get it in any tangible way until it came to work with the Gaza Youth Committee a couple of years ago. I'm sure you were aware when colleagues of ours who are members of our peace-building committee were jailed specifically because of their work by participating in Skype meetings with Israelis and Palestinians. So Hamas's efforts at this point did not get Palestinians to feel that, as far as I had understood, that this should keep them away from peace building efforts. If anything, it showed them that something so simple as trying to have a conversation online with the enemy was considered dangerous, that it inspired more desire to engage with the other. Over the last several years, a lot of what we've seen in grassroots peacebuilding efforts is actually on both sides, the more extreme communities and the communities that are more religious, are typically more conservative, come from lower socioeconomic areas, and are often most affected by the conflict, are actually the highest numbers of participants joining projects. I can tell you from my time with Kids for Peace Jerusalem that we were a place, and Kids for Peace is still a place, even though I'm not there, I see it, that the right wing and that the non-choir of the peace camp are really where people feel comfortable, where religious views are respected, where people look different, dressed more modestly, and that peace building and the grassroots movements have had to adapt. And they've adapted by offering, male and female separate programs and requiring modest dress during activities and offering halal and kosher meals. Peace building didn't used to be like this in the immediate post-Oslo days.
I want to pause you a minute there.
Yeah.
That was very thorough, and I appreciate that. I have another question, and it can be you, Ms. Rothbart, or anybody else, because you all have an interesting perspective from your grassroots work. We've had a number of people in our committee here, from Secretary of State Blinken to our Secretary to the UN to a host of other high-level government officials that all say the same thing, that given a popular election, that Hamas would win a popular election. It's likely why they're not having an election. Obviously, they have the power to launch thousands of rockets into Israel and be allowed to do so, not be stopped on the ground without Israel going in to stop them. So from a grassroots perspective, why do you, if you feel that way, why do you think they feel Hamas would win a popular election? Or why do you feel Hamas would win a popular election if that is how you feel?
I mean, I can't speak to the Palestinian political ground, and maybe Nada, again, it would be more appropriate for you to say that, but I can tell you one thing, that who people vote for does not necessarily affect their need to be engaged in this program. And what MEPA can do is provide additional resources to help grassroots peace building reach more and more extreme societies and change their perspective.
Thank you, ma'am. I would like to give one of the other panelists an opportunity to answer that if they have opinion on it. If you don't have opinion on it.
I can jump in very quickly, although this is not exactly and particularly my specialty. But I can reassure and emphasize what Meredith has already said, that people definitely they don't vote particularly for the violence interest or the interest of raging wars and exacerbating the situation on ground. What people look for is more of stability and prosperity and ability to thrive, and particularly, even though people would vote for
in 5 seconds quickly,
for
groups think they see Hamas as a stability potentially?
No. What I'm saying is Hamas has more of a social program that supports poor people and supports people, orphans, and they play on the religious grounds, not on the political ground when it comes to engaging with people and community. But again, as Meredith said, when we engage as civil society with communities and people on ground, we very much focus on who to engage with and how, and there's lots of mechanisms by MEPA and by USAID particularly that are very stringent in terms of knowing who our participants are. The vetting processes are specifically very stringent. I've worked with several USAID projects, and the collection of information of participants, vendors, consulting firms is a very complex process in terms who NGOs can engage with, and this particularly prevents our programming and the taxpayers' money of the U.S. to basically go to participants and vendors that are tagged as Hamas and other organizations that are similar.
Thank you, ma'am, and thank you, Chairman, for indulging the answer.
Thank you, Mr. Mast. Mr. Vargas, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
First of all, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this very important hearing. I appreciate it very much, and I appreciate all the witnesses that are here today testifying. And I particularly, now that I know, want to send a shout out to Chairman Nita Lowy. She was a real hero of many of us. We love her dearly. And I'm a big supporter of MIPA, and I think that the work that you're doing is very, very valuable and wholeheartedly support it. I do have to say, though, those of us who study history have a deep concern for the defense and protection of Israel because of what we saw in Europe, the mass murder of Jews, the Holocaust. And many of us swore that never again, even those of us who are not Jews, said never again will innocent Jews be murdered like that without the ability to defend themselves. And that's why so many of us are very, very strong supporters of Israel. I certainly count myself as one of those, as a non-Jew and a devout Catholic. But I also have to say that I've been disappointed in the BDS movement. I take a look at the BDS movement. I think it's one, anti-Semitic, and two, it goes against the peace process and what we see, the work that you're doing. But then I was very heartened with the Abraham Accords, where I saw that 4 Arab nations normalized relations with Israel. I thought that that was fantastic. And I hope that we continue to do that. I think that that's a very positive thing. But again, always myself, keeping my eye on the prize, the security and protection of Israel. With that being said, and again, appreciating the work you do, I want to know, what is your opinion of the BDS movement? I think it cuts against everything you're doing. And I'll allow anyone to answer it that would like to answer that. Don't all step up at once.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. I've been struck by the conversation, the testimonies, and the spirit of the MEP Act. I agree with you that the BDS movement cuts directly against the spirit of the MEPA Act. I think about examples like SodaStream, which we've just been talking about. How can we bring Israelis and Palestinians together? That's an example of a company that was doing exactly that, and it was a victim of the BDS movement. I think it's wrong. So I think that it's a very unfortunate. So I do think that the MEPA Act is in direct conflict with the BDS movement. Thank you.
Does anyone have an opposite view of that? I'd like to hear.
I would like to take a moment just to say, BDS has been in the news over here in Israel more than ever in the last day or so because of the statement of Ben & Jerry's pulling out from the occupied territories and saying that they're also possibly going to pull out of Israel in general. And MEPA is focused on engaging Israelis and Palestinians, on having productive engagement, on building peace, not on disengaging, which is what BDS is working toward, which is the exact opposite of what we're trying to build.
Anyone else have a perspective on this?
If I can just add, Congressman Vargas, I would build on what has been said by my colleagues, and also this goes to the question that Congressman Mast had as well. As Meredith has just mentioned, that what MEPA does is support the idea of engagement, which in turn brings hope to an environment where there is a lot of despair. And this ties back to some of the dynamics that Congressman Mast was talking about, people's voting patterns and choices when they're surrounded by despair, and peacebuilding provides an opportunity to counter that and an alternative to that. And this is why the scale is so important. I mentioned in my remarks the idea of needing to elevate these voices. The headlines are constantly consumed by the violent spoilers. And we need the headlines to be more consumed by the hope and example that this work provides. It's tangible and it's concrete. And beyond that, if you allow me to indulge in something that's less tangible and concrete, but I do think is important. There was a study that was actually done where I work at USIP of facilitated dialogue projects, not just in the Israeli-Palestinian context, but in Pakistan and in Colombia as well. And there were many findings about what made for successful project success, meaning transfer of impact from within inside the literal room or metaphorical room of the programs to the greater society. But the researchers of that report ended with a comment which I thought was very meaningful, which is most of the participants of these programs come out saying that these programs are a life raft of hope amidst a sea of despair. And the question is how you put a value and quantify the impact of hope in these kind of scenarios. It's hard to know how you quantify it, and maybe the field can catch up to figuring out a way. But in the meantime, what we know is empowering people who are willing to engage and have the difficult conversations is incredibly important.
I'm going to have to interrupt you because my time is over, and the chairman has been very generous in indulging me. But I would just say I support very much the ability of bringing people together and funding it like we did in Northern Ireland. Just don't let the money have to go to Hamas, because that would destroy your program. Be very, very strong about that. God bless all of you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vargas. Mr. Burchett, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Deutsch. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, sir.
Great. Thank you, brother. And thank y'all for being here. I want, and anybody who could answer this, just jump in on the panel. Does the BDS movement hurt the livelihoods of Palestinians who work for Israeli companies?
Excuse me, can you repeat? It's not very clear.
Yes, ma'am. It might be my accent. I'm from East
No,
Tennessee.
it's the mic.
Well, okay, because I was going to say East Tennessee is the only place in the world where people do not speak with an accent. So I was trying to. Does the BDS movement hurt the livelihood of Palestinians who work for Israeli companies?
It doesn't. To be honest, we're a community that has grown immune to the attacks of BDS and anti-normalization movements. We've survived even more difficult realities, geopolitical realities, consecutive wars on Gaza, the Second Intifada. We're on ground, as much as I would say the picture is not as rosy and as easy to basically engage with Palestinian communities and participants and constituents. However, our community has learned how to push the bar further. We've learned how to find out mechanisms to engage with people and to convince them that the way forward is to basically engage with Israeli civil society. When it comes to recruiting participants and engaging with our stakeholders, we make it clear that our aspirations for engaging with the other is basically to create an independent Palestinian state based on international resolutions and international law, that we're committed as a community for Palestinian rights, that we're not going offline of our national aspirations. It's just that our methodology is different. And here's where we, how we stand strong for our beliefs and our values, but also stand strong of our methodology to keep engaging with the Israeli civil society. So no, it does shake us a little bit, but it does not harm us per se, but it makes us stronger to basically voice out our values and our methodology.
Thank you, ma'am. Does anybody else care to comment on that briefly?
Yes, thank you, Congressman. And I love your East Tennessee accent. Thank you very much. Although it's a non-accent, Congressman. Thank you very much. Yes.
I'm kind of like Walter Cronkite.
It's very reassuring. It's a very reassuring accent.
That's what Ted Deutsch always tells me anyway. I don't know, but anyway, he might just be.
Congressman, BDS hurts Palestinians. It hurts. Hundreds of jobs have been lost in the territories, whether it's SodaStream, this example of Ben and Jerry's, young Palestinian leaders who have no voice without being threatened by the PA condemn BDS because it destroys their job prospects. Thank you for asking that question, Congressman.
All right. Thank you, brother. The panel, I'm not sure. Am I on? Ted, am I on?
Sure, Mr.
All right.
Burchett.
Thanks, brother.
Sounded just like Walter Cronkite.
Yes, sir. Right on. Since this is the first time with an Arab coalition, how do you think the new government will deal with the Palestinian issue and settlement? Am I on?
I'm sorry, for me, the question broke up and I couldn't hear the question.
There's something wrong. Ted, there's something wrong. It keeps, my microphone keeps going in and out. Maybe we could.
No, I think you're good now. I think good. Try now. No. Nope. I think you're muted.
I'm sorry, was someone able to repeat the question? I did not hear the question.
I'm sorry, I'll do it real quick because I'm going to run out of time. This first government in recent memory that's without Netanyahu in it. And how do you think the new government will deal with the Palestinian issue and settlement building?
Meredith, as an Israeli, may have views on this, just than mine. I think what we're seeing is in this government is a diverse and broad coalition of different views that span the political and ideological spectrum, including on views in relation to the conflict in Palestinians. We have heard statements from the Prime Minister and others about certainly the need to shrink the conflict, improve Palestinian lives. I think this government, given that it's new and the ideological and political diversity within Israel is going to be taking its time before we see how it's going to more directly approach this issue.
One quick, how much time do I have left, Ted? None?
No, but you lost about 20 seconds, so go ahead, Mr. Burchett.
Okay, I'm sorry. The Palestinian Authority, if they ever allow elections to take place, what are the chances that Hamas will win some seats in the West Bank? And I think we know how that would affect Israeli Palestinian peace efforts, but do you think that's a possibility?
I think I'll just chime in and say I think what we need to focus on is the reality in which we're given right now and do the best with the situation. It doesn't seem like elections are going to be held anytime soon. And we have access right now to scale peace building work, and that's what we're going to focus on.
Okay. I appreciate your idealism, ma'am. Ted, I'll yield back, brother. I think I've run over. Thank you for your hospitality, Ted. I appreciate you, brother.
Thanks, Mr. Burchett. Ms. Manning, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Deutsch, and thank you, Chairman Deutsch and Ranking Member Wilson, for holding this very timely and very important hearing. I want to associate myself with the earlier remarks of Chairman Deutsch. Our recent CODEL to Israel gave us reasons for optimism as a result of our conversations with leaders in the new Israeli government. And I have observed people-to-people programs in Israel for many years and know many NGOs in Israel have made progress, but on a small scale in specific localities with underfunded efforts. I'm extremely excited about what could happen with the significant funding available through the MEPA program, and I was very happy to read all of the proposals in your very fine written testimony. In our recent CODEL, we visited a USAID-funded program for teens in Ramallah. We met with a wonderful, promising group of Palestinian high school students, and we had a wonderful conversation until Chairman Meeks asked them about what they thought of Israel. And many of them responded very quickly with the same almost remote phrase. They all said, "We hate Israel because they stole our lands and they kill our babies." It was really a chilling turn in the conversation. And at our next meeting with a group of really great Palestinian business leaders, they mentioned that we're facing a ticking time bomb with young people who engage with social media and are deeply influenced by anti-Israel messages that they're bombarded with on social media. And we had just seen that ticking time bomb in action. So while I embrace the great programs that are suggested in your written testimony, I can't help but wonder, with all the money we invest in very important people-to-people programs, how do we combat the destructive messages that young Palestinians and probably young Israelis see over and over on social media? And I leave that to whoever would like to jump in and answer first. Who's got the solution?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in if Nada and Lucy are comfortable with that. Kathy, it was such a great question, and I believe we've met before you were in the House, and it's so exciting to see you in this role as Congresswoman. And thank you for hosting us. We are. This is exactly what we're talking about when we're thinking about the movement becoming strategic, right? This is what we're talking about, where funding can't just go to a program here, a program there, and continue to be fragmented. What MEPA is offering is actually looking at peace building systematically. And we have mapped out and seen areas that are missing, right? The way that it's been before, when as just a government grants program, is an open call where we receive application, not we, right? The US government receives applications and chooses what's most interesting. What MEPA can do now is identify issues like you're talking about. There aren't major media programs that are trying to change attitudes. One of the meetings that I was working with today is an organization called 0202, which is working specifically on using media and social media to show the perspective of the other side to the different communities. We can, through MEPA, identify missing areas and invest through things like the Innovation Lab and other major infrastructure institutes through a tech hub on addressing the issues that are missing. And this is why we're so hopeful that the programmatic implementation of MEPA is not going to be just supporting grants of programs that already exist, but actually creating them.
Thank you, Meredith. It's so lovely to see you in this context. Would anybody else like to jump in? Because I do think this is just a critically important issue.
Congresswoman, thank you for that very important and thoughtful question. I think with a high percentage of unemployment, there's a very large youth bulge among all these young people. Something like 50% are unemployed or underemployed. I didn't include it in my testimony because I wanted to get through it in my 5 minutes, but that's a very significant statistic. As I said earlier, Congresswoman, the best social program in the world is a job. And so I just think that if you are working then and you don't have time to hang around on social media if you're working, I think that reduces some of the tension. Thank you, Congresswoman.
Great. Thank you very much. Anyone else?
Congressman Manning, I'll just add, I mean, I reinforce what's been said, but you're right. There was a crisis, as I mentioned, in the younger generation. That's where attitudes are hard to align. And this is why there's the urgency of this kind of strategic approach that Meredith mentioned. There are programs existing that do work with social media engagement and citizen journalism and efforts to try to elevate again the voices, socialize the idea of peace building in communities that just aren't as familiar with what it can achieve and what it does. We've talked about Northern Ireland a lot today. Reverend Gary Mason, who is very involved in that process, has often talked about what a long-term proposition and process peace building is, and how the value of peace building is that people in conflict, you precisely need to be talking to the people who you dislike, who you're scared of, you sometimes hate. And what we've seen, as I think Meredith has also spoken, is even people who express those attitudes many come for different motivations to these programs. They're curious. They come in the door for different reasons, sometimes because of academic opportunities that are involved in certain programs. But once they're in the door and have the opportunity to engage, you begin to see this personal transformation, which again takes time and in turn goes back to their communities. And if you bring this to scale, you can get your head around the idea of sort of a multiplier effect and a ripple effect over time.
Thank you. My time has expired, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Manning. Mr. Schneider, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Deutsch, and thank you for having this important hearing. I want to thank the witnesses for sharing your perspectives. This is an issue that I think is critical to the future of the region. As Kathy Manning said, I want to associate myself with the comments of the chair, but also having been on that trip, being in the room with Kathy, hearing the question, I appreciate her asking the question she did. Ms. Mishkin Rothbart, I'll start with you. You talk about two goals. I want to dig a little bit deeper into that. You talk about the goal, first, the need to create a critical mass of people. And having been connected with this issue for virtually my entire life, there have been programs going back for a long time, Seeds of Peace, Neve Shalom, other initiatives trying to bring people together, but usually at a smaller scale. What do you mean by critical mass? And also, do you draw a distinction between reaching out to the youth versus adults? Do it together, do it separately, do it in sequence?
Thank you. It's a really great question, and it's something that we're continuing to explore. I don't think there's one answer. And I've had the opportunity to work with Neve Shalom and to work with Seeds of Peace on issues. And something that comes up a lot with the organizations that struggle to reach thousands and thousands, or even dream of their programs getting to be that large, that we're working on a lot is how to make them replicable. Just because an individual project couldn't necessarily maintain that same authenticity with large groups doesn't mean that they wouldn't be able to offer many more versions of the smaller group work at a much larger scale. And so this is something that we're working on with the organizations, is again looking at the field as a strategic whole and figuring out how to engage them. Lucy, in her work with USIP, helped us do an evaluation during my time for Peace, where we actually looked at 10 years of our operations and evaluated if we were reaching a critical mass in Jerusalem. What we found after that first evaluation was that we weren't. And one of the reasons was because we weren't capitalizing on how many people each person actually can be affecting in their lives, right? And so if we were engaging a few hundred youth at a time each year, and you only count those youth, then you're only reaching a few hundred youth each year, right? But if as part of that program, which we started to do, we required parent engagement, right? And so that more than doubled the program. We required the youth to undergo storytelling of how they can tell the story of what they're learning and what their experience in Kids for Peace was in their schools, in other classrooms, doing walking tours of their neighborhoods, inviting friends and families to hospitality programs. Just that one evaluation alone allowed us to expand our programs so that instead of reaching 120 participants like we had in that first year, we had over 2,000 the next. And that was only from one program.
And fantastic. I'm just going to claw back my time to ask another question, but I will emphasize, in fact, I learned this from Eitan Wertheimer, another Israeli philanthropist, the idea of amplifiers and multipliers, and that's exactly what you're talking about, finding ways to expand the contact of the program. If I can turn to Ms. Majdalani, it's good to see you again. I would be reluctant if I didn't call out Fred Andes. I think he'd be mad at both of us if we didn't give him a call out. But you mentioned earlier the Abraham Accords, and I'm leading legislation in the Congress in support of the Abraham Accords. I think anytime you can bring normalization of relations between two countries, Israel and any of the Arab states would be good, not just for those states, but for the region. But I'd love your perspective on both in the context of bridge building and peace building, as we're talking here in the context of MEPA, but also I know the work EcoPeace does on climate. What impact the Abraham Accords might have and how important they are to the future of the region.
Yes, thank you, Congressman Brad Schneider. Certainly what we see is a great opportunity for initiatives where Abraham Accords can be used as an opportunity also to advance Middle East peace in the region, particularly if we target the Gulf investments in projects that are relevant to sustainability, potentially investing in solar energy, in the region, investing in technology in the region that would create jobs, that would also advance potential solutions that address water scarcity, that would address also cooperation on the academic level between Palestinians, Israelis, Jordanians, and also the countries that are engaged in the Abraham Accords. We see a great opportunity of knowledge exchange, technology exchange, but also real investment on ground. So certainly EcoPeace throughout several programs and other organizations, of course, can utilize this opportunity. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And again, I want to thank the witnesses for sharing your time with us today. I wish I had more time. Chair, thank you for giving me the extra 30 seconds. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Schneider. We are privileged to have participation of Representative Jacobs from the full committee today. Representative Jacobs, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Chair Deutsch, for letting me join on your committee for this hearing. And thank you to all of our panelists for all of the work that you do. I know it's hard day in, day out working on this issue that sometimes can feel so overwhelming and intractable. So thank you. And, you know, I know firsthand how important these programs can be. I actually participated in one when I was in high school and had a great experience. And I know that in the opening testimony, you all talked about how peace building efforts are not a replacement for a political process, which I agree with. But I also think it's important that peace building efforts aim to, in addition to bringing parties together, address some underlying grievances and improve the lives of people on the ground at the local level. So, Ms. Rothbart, I was hoping you could speak to a little bit more about your theory of change, about how peace building will work in the Israeli-Palestinian context.
Thank you. I'll be happy to. I've been very honored to get to work with many esteemed colleagues and some in Washington to help dream together what the theory of change for MEPA could look like. And it's a lot of what we're discovering also over here. We believe that if a critical mass of Israelis and Palestinians at all sectors of society, right? Youth, just like Representative Schneider mentioned, women, mothers, fathers, adults, in the religious sector, in the private sector, all over, have an opportunity to have positive experiences with the other and see themselves as critical agents of change, then they'll take responsibility for changing the reality on the ground, right? And what that will allow them to do is see that the conflict is actually resolvable. It will break it down from having a zero-sum nature into manageable parts that we can start to tackle one by one. We believe that the reason that this conflict has been so unsolvable is that people don't believe that it's actually possible to make peace, and that that's the first step that we need to take.
Well, thank you. And if you or any of the panelists really want to talk about what lessons you've learned from past efforts, because clearly this theory of change has been said by many groups in the past. And I know you said scaling it up is a part of it, but I also think even in the smaller locations where you have seen critical mass and you have seen it scale and be there for many, many years, we haven't necessarily seen this theory of change come to fruition. So what else do you think needs to happen, or what lessons have you learned so that this time we'll actually get to that outcome?
I can jump quickly here on two issues. First of all, it's as Meredith mentioned, is scaling up. The second is creating also a safe space and infrastructure where Palestinians and Israelis can meet together and work out and discuss issues extensively in details, work on joint projects and tangible projects on ground. And encourage entrepreneurship and partnerships on both sides together in meaningful projects, which could also improve people's lives and also create jobs. On another level, I think what is critical is to also improve the access of Palestinians to actually meet Israelis, and vice versa for Israelis to meet Palestinians in the Palestinian territories. The issue of permits is a critical issue for people to actually meet each other physically. As much as we want, or as much as we got used to the virtual, meeting platforms like Zoom and others, it's not as effective as actually meeting people in person and learning about them and seeing the body language.
I totally agree with you on that. I'm going to jump in quickly just to get to my last question. Sorry. I was, hoping Ms. Rothbart or Ms. Kurtzer-Ellenbogen, in the written testimony, you said that 82% of peacebuilding organizations are run by an Israeli director, only 18% run by Palestinian directors. I think it's really important that we fix that. I think it, really shows a lot about the power dynamic in how we're working on peacebuilding. And I was just hoping you could, in the last 10 seconds, talk about what USAID and Congress could do to ensure increased prime grant awards to Palestinian-run smaller peacebuilding organizations and support the development and growth of these organizations.
I'll jump in if that's okay, Lucy. I think that something we see in USAID grants a lot and is important and comes from a really good place is a requirement to have constant engagement between Israelis and Palestinians. One of the things we need to report on in our compliance reporting is how many hours are joint and how many are together, and constantly showing the percentages. I think it's okay to admit the power dynamics and to invest in Palestinian leadership. To say that there is a gap, there are a lot of gaps, and that part of MEPA is going to require investing in leadership training, in informal education programs that are specifically around empowering Palestinian leadership to become peace builders.
Thank you. And I joined your committee and took too much time. So sorry, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
No apology necessary. Excellent line of questioning. Thank you, Ms. Jacobs. And I will now yield myself time. I want to start just by thanking the witnesses. Actually, before even doing that, Ms. Rothbart, you made Aliyah. You moved to Israel from Allentown.
Yep.
First congressional hearing ever with a chairman and a witness from the Lehigh Valley. So it's I just learned that fact thanks to Mr. Schneider. So thank you. Thanks to all of you. I think what you saw, what our witnesses saw today after your excellent testimony is the fact that this is a tall task that we all have in trying to keep the focus on these really important programs and this critical work that you're doing to help bring people together. So many of us sort of fall back on asking questions that are centered on the conflict, and I think Ms. Kurtzer-Ellenbogen, you talked about how we need headlines to be consumed by hope instead, and that doesn't happen in one hearing, but today I think is a really, really important start for that. And I want to ask Ms. Majdalani and Ms. Rothbart, I want to follow up on a couple of things that you said. Ms. Rothbart, you started by introducing yourself as a Jewish religious Zionist. You then went on to talk about the importance of the work you do working with the community, and you made a really interesting point about some of the most conservative voices on both sides participating in this program. And then I'm going to pull this together in a second. Ms. Majdalani, you talked about the importance of space and of having a space to come together, and what happens when Israelis and Palestinians are actually together in a room talking about these issues, seeing one another, learning from one another. So I would ask both of you to speak a little more about what that should look like, how we should focus on building that out, and then Ms. Rothbart, the importance of recognizing that the people who are participating, I think if I can put this in terms that we typically hear, this isn't just a group of lefties who are just getting together, talking about how to work through the conflict. These are the broad cross-section of Israeli and Palestinian society who recognize that there is this shared commitment that they make to advancing better lives for all. So I would turn to both of you. Ms. Majdalani, let me let you go first, just in terms of the space and what we should be looking for.
Thank you, Representative Deutsch. Definitely, it's important to have a safe space, as I mentioned. Usually, where the only space where Palestinians and Israelis meet in Area C in the West Bank is just a particular place, and usually it's a space where it can be improved, but also other places can serve as a hub, particularly also in Jerusalem. There needs to be more spaces that are recognizable for this community to be able to meet safely. The other issue is, as I mentioned, to utilize the US aid taxpayers' money in the most sufficient way. Specifically that the permits denial issue for Palestinian participants to meet Israelis in Israel is a critical issue. Usually when we want to meet Israelis and to put Palestinians and Israelis together, we have to travel to Jordan in order to be able to meet each other, and this is not an efficient way of actually utilizing taxpayers' money. What is necessary is to create a safe space in the region, in Palestine and in Israel, for those people to meet.
Thanks. Ms. Rothbart?
Thank you. Yes, I was also very excited to see that you're from the Lehigh Valley as well. And your question touched on many issues, and I do think it's important to reiterate that peace building did used to be a lefty issue on both sides. And the needs assessment report that we published last year, that Amal Tikva needs assessment, we go through and systematically look at who has been leading peace building and who has been involved until now. And we saw that there has been a major turning point since 2014 on both sides of the communities that are most affected, that are more conservative, being engaged. And it is important to say that there's a lot of religious Zionists in this space. I used to feel in my early days working in this space 10, 12 years ago that I was one of the only ones. And that's just not true anymore, not at the staff level and not at the participant level. And unfortunately, our community has gotten a bad reputation because of some of the really extreme members of the Knesset right now who are trying to reclaim the name religious Zionism in the name of violence. And what we need to do is bring it back, and MEPA can really be a space to be much more welcoming, to include the communities that are really critical toward making change.
I don't want to take advantage of being last and holding everyone here for too much longer, but I do want to, as we wrap this up, I do want to ask Ms. Kurtzer-Ellenbogen just one last question. If the result of this hearing is simply to make people feel good that they're wonderful people on the ground who are engaged in peace building, and now we have a funding source to do a little more and fund some more programs, that's nice, but that's not the goal, and it's not the goal that that my dear friend Nita Lowy had in mind. We can use this moment coming out of this hearing and this important moment with MEPA to really ensure that this is not just about funding some programs, but that the Nita Lowy Act becomes central to our broader efforts to work toward peace in the region. Can't we? And how do we do that? And what's the next step we should take?
Thank you for that great question, Congressman Deutsch. We can, we should, and as I said in my opening remarks, the urgency is there. We've talked about the urgency. The starting capacity is there. If we're willing and able to implement, we've heard from two amazing examples alone today. The interest is there. I think I might have also mentioned earlier, there are programs, and Meredith and Nadia might be able to speak to this in more specifics, with waiting lists that programs can't accommodate because they don't have the resources. So again, the demand is there, and now the opportunity is there thanks to Congresswoman Lowy and all those who supported this act. The next thing, we talked about some of them today, is bringing the field to scale, investing strategically. One of the things we haven't talked about today is the fact that the act does allow for leveraging U.S. funds for international participation, and that's something we've talked about. The Abraham Accords today, the promise that is held in many areas. Here's an opportunity that we've had in the past. The US has been a primary funder of this work to the level that it's funded it. The European Union has been another large funder. The idea of being able to leverage other international actors and allies, and particularly those who have different points of leverage. It's not just the funding, it's the different points of relational political leverage with the different actors, which when you combine those attributes really offer an opportunity. Nader talked about permits. That's something that the US and members of Congress might be able to talk to the Israeli government about. There are many things that the Palestinians need to do as well to stop delegitimizing the field of peace building. There are using this opportunity created by the Abraham Accords to be invested in this conflict and being able to talk to those with whom they have influence and lean on the relevant actors to do what they can to lift the restrictions and enable this funding, this US taxpayer funding, to have the maximal impact that was intended by Congresswoman Lowy, and all of you who supported it are key to this effort. I think it's an incredibly exciting time as someone who's been analyzing this kind of work, poring over evaluations for years, trying to understand what more needs to be done. There's been so much talk for years of the idea of scale and international cooperation around making something meaningful happen. And I think we really see an opening here that everybody who is in this field is willing to get started on with purpose. And as you've heard today, even have some of the answers of how to come running out the gate. So thank you, all of you, and each of you, for this opportunity, both to testify today and also with this Middle East Partnership Fund for Peace.
Great. Thank you so much, Ms. Kurtzer-Ellenbogen, Mr. Runde. Thank you both for your excellent analysis and insight. And Ms. Majdalani and Ms. Rothbart, we are so grateful for what I absolutely believe is a historic hearing, both in what we've pulled together and the voices, your important voices that we've brought to our colleagues, and for setting the stage for really significant advancements that can help you and the other peace builders continue the path forward. Thanks everyone for participating today. And with that, our hearing is adjourned.